The rifle barrel gleamed in the afternoon sun as the woman pressed her shoulder against the cabin door, her hands steady despite the 5 men circling her property like wolves testing a fence line. Priscilla Brennan had seen trouble coming from a mile off, watched the dust cloud rise from the valley below as the riders approached her isolated homestead in the rolling hills outside Paso Robles, California. It was October 1878, and the last of the harvest sat in burlap sacks inside her barn, grain she had grown and threshed herself after her father passed that spring. She had suspected they would come eventually, claimed she owed money or taxes or some fabricated debt that would justify taking everything she had worked for. Men always seemed to think a woman alone was easy pickings. She had been wrong about one thing, though. They were not tax collectors or creditors. They were something worse. "Now, miss, we do not want any trouble," the leader called out, a scarred man with tobacco-stained teeth visible even from 30 yards away. "We are just passing through. Need some supplies is all. You share what you have got, we will be on our way peaceful-like." Priscilla knew a lie when she heard one. She had seen the way their eyes swept over her cabin, her barn, the smoke rising from her chimney that promised warmth and food. She had seen how they spread out in a half circle, cutting off any route of escape. These were not travelers seeking charity. These were men who took what they wanted. "You can water your horses at the creek and move on," she called back, keeping her voice firm despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I've got nothing to spare." The leader laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "See, that is where you are wrong. A woman alone out here. You have got plenty we might be interested in. Now why don't you put that rifle down before somebody gets hurt?" Priscilla's finger moved closer to the trigger. She was a decent shot, had been hunting rabbits and deer since she was 12 years old, but 5 men against 1 woman were terrible odds, no matter how good her aim. Her father had taught her to stand her ground, though, told her that showing weakness invited disaster. She would not give these men an inch. "I said move on," she repeated, raising the rifle to her shoulder. "Next warning comes with a bullet." The men exchanged glances, and she saw the calculation in their eyes. They were weighing whether the prize was worth the risk. The leader opened his mouth to speak again when a new voice cut through the tension, deep and calm, and coming from somewhere to Priscilla's left. "Lady says move on. I would listen if I were you." Every head turned. Priscilla's heart hammered as she caught sight of the man emerging from the tree line where her property met the wild forest. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the space between the aspens. Long, dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that held her attention even at a distance. They were the color of storm clouds, steady and unflinching as they assessed the situation. He carried a rifle in one hand as though it weighed nothing, and a hunting knife hung from his belt alongside what looked like a tomahawk. His clothes were buckskin and leather, worn from use but well maintained. This was not a drifter or a ranch hand. This was a man who lived in the mountains, who knew the wilderness the way most men knew their own homes. "This is not your concern, friend," the leader said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Just a friendly conversation between us and the lady." "Conversation is over," the mountain man said, and there was no threat in his tone, just flat statement of fact. He moved forward with surprising grace for someone his size, positioning himself between Priscilla's cabin and the riders. "You have got about 10 seconds to decide which direction you are heading. Choose wrong, and you will not make it back to town." One of the younger riders, foolish with bravado, reached for his pistol. The mountain man's rifle came up so fast, Priscilla barely saw the movement, and the crack of the shot split the air. The young man yelped and yanked his hand back, his hat spinning off his head with a bullet hole through the crown. 9 seconds, the mountain man said, already chambering another round. The riders scattered like startled quail, wheeling their horses and kicking up dirt as they fled back down the trail toward the valley. Their curses and shouts faded into the distance, swallowed by the vast California landscape. Within moments, only dust and silence remained. Priscilla found she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, her hands beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. The mountain man lowered his rifle and turned to face her, and she got her first clear look at him. He was younger than she had initially thought, maybe 30 at most, with a strong jaw beneath that beard and features that would have been handsome if not for the hardness around his eyes. Those were old eyes, eyes that had seen things she could probably not imagine. "Thank you," she managed, surprised her voice came out steady. "I am grateful for your help." He studied her for a moment, his gaze taking in her stance, the rifle still braced against her shoulder, the set of her jaw. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "You would have shot if you had to." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "Good." He shifted his rifle to his left hand and extended his right. "Tucker Brennan, been trapping up in the high country." Priscilla blinked in surprise, then slowly lowered her weapon and stepped forward to shake his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, the hand of someone who worked with them every day. "Priscilla Brennan, this is my father's land. Was my father's land." Tucker's eyebrows rose slightly. "Brennan? Your father was not James Brennan, was he? You knew him?" "Met him a few times over the years when I came down to trade furs. Good man. Honest. I'm sorry for your loss." He glanced around the property, taking in the well-maintained cabin, the barn, the neat fences. "You have been keeping this place up yourself?" "Since April," Priscilla confirmed. She felt suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny, aware of how she must look with dirt on her dress and her blonde hair escaping its braid. She was 22 years old and had been managing alone for 6 months, and while she had thought she was doing well, the close call with those riders had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Tucker nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Those men will be back. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but word spreads fast that there is a woman alone out here. They will come back with more numbers or wait until you let your guard down." The words sent ice through Priscilla's veins because she knew he was right. She had been lucky today, lucky that this stranger had appeared when he did. She could not count on luck twice. "What would you suggest I do? Abandon my home? Everything I have is here." "I am not suggesting anything," Tucker said carefully. "Just telling you how things are." He paused, seemed to consider something, then continued. "I was heading into Paso Robles to trade my furs before winter sets in. Your place is on the way. If you do not mind, I could camp on your property tonight. Make sure those riders do not circle back. Tomorrow, I will head into town." Pride warred with practicality in Priscilla's chest. She had been determined to prove she could manage on her own, that she did not need anyone's help or protection. But pride would not stop bullets, and the stubbornness would not keep her safe if those men returned in the dark. "I would appreciate that," she said finally. "There is space in the barn for you to sleep, and I can offer you supper as payment for your trouble." Something that might have been amusement touched Tucker's eyes. "Barn is fine, but you do not owe me payment. Your father showed me kindness once when I needed it. I am just returning the favor." He moved to the edge of the clearing and gave a low whistle. Moments later, a massive bay horse emerged from the trees, followed by a pack mule laden with bundles of furs. Both animals looked well cared for, their coats glossy and their movements confident. Tucker had the manner of a man who took care of what was his. Priscilla watched as he unsaddled his horse and began setting up a simple camp near the barn. His movements were efficient, economical, the result of years of practice. She should go inside and start preparing supper, but she found herself hesitating, curious about this man who had appeared out of nowhere, like something from a legend. "What brought you down from the mountains now?" she asked. "It is early for winter yet." Tucker glanced up from checking his mule's hooves. "Snows come early in the high country. Another week and some of the passes will be closed until spring. Besides, I had enough furs for a good stake. Figured I would trade them, stock up on supplies, maybe spend a few weeks somewhere with a roof before heading back up." "You live up there year-round?" "Mostly. Come down maybe twice a year, spring and fall, to trade and resupply. The mountains suit me better than towns." Priscilla could understand that sentiment more than she would have expected. In the months since her father's death, she'd come to appreciate the solitude of the homestead, the peace of being away from the noise and judgment of civilization. Still, there was a difference between choosing solitude and being forced into isolation by circumstance. "Well, I am glad you chose today to come down," she said. "I hate to think what would have happened if you had not been nearby." Tucker's expression darkened slightly. "You would have fought. Maybe won, maybe not. But you would have fought." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "That counts for something." The respect in his voice warmed something in Priscilla's chest, a feeling she had not experienced in months. Most men in town looked at her with pity or speculation, seeing either a helpless widow or an opportunity to be exploited. Tucker looked at her like she was an equal, someone capable of making her own choices and facing the consequences. "I should start supper," she said, suddenly needing to move to do something with her hands. "You're welcome to come inside and wash up if you like. There's a pump by the back door." "Appreciate it," Tucker said. "I will see to my animals first, then take you up on that." Priscilla nodded and retreated to her cabin, grateful for a moment to collect herself. Inside, the familiar space seemed smaller somehow, more intimate with the knowledge that she would be sharing a meal with a stranger. She stirred up the fire in the stove and pulled out supplies for a simple supper: salt pork, beans, cornbread, dried apples for a compote. Nothing fancy, but filling and honest. As she worked, her hands moving through the familiar rhythms of cooking, her mind kept returning to Tucker Brennan. He shared her father's surname, which struck her as an odd coincidence, though Brennan was common enough in California. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. She barely knew him, had only just met him, but he had stepped in when she needed help without asking for anything in return. That was rare in Priscilla's experience. Most kindness came with strings attached, expectations that had to be met. Her own neighbors in the valley had offered help after her father's death, but their assistance always came with suggestions that she sell the land, move to town, perhaps consider remarrying, as though she were a problem to be solved rather than a person making her own way. The sound of boots on the back porch pulled her from her thoughts. She heard water splashing as Tucker used the pump, then a knock on the door frame. "Come in," she called, and he ducked through the doorway, his height making the cabin seem even smaller. He had washed the trail dust from his face and hands, and his hair was damp where he had run wet fingers through it. He looked around the cabin with interest, taking in the neat space, the shelves lined with preserved foods, the quilt her mother had made draped over the rocking chair by the fireplace. "You have done well keeping the place up," he said. "Your father would be proud." The words hit Priscilla unexpectedly hard, and she had to blink back sudden tears. No one had said that to her, not once in all these months. They had pitied her or doubted her or told her what she should do, but no one had acknowledged that she might be doing something worth being proud of. "Thank you," she managed, focusing intently on the cornbread she was mixing. "That means more than you know." Tucker settled into one of the chairs at the table, his large frame somehow not seeming intrusive in the small space. "How did your father die, if you do not mind my asking? He was not old when I knew him." "Heart gave out," Priscilla said quietly. "He was working in the fields one morning, and I found him when I brought lunch out. The doctor said he probably did not feel much pain, just went quick. But it was still a shock. He was only 53. "That is young," Tucker agreed, "and it left you here alone." "My mother died when I was 10. My brothers moved east years ago, looking for better opportunities. I stayed because this place, this life, it is what I know, what I love." She glanced at him. "I suppose that seems foolish to some people." "Not to me," Tucker said simply. "A person should be where they want to be, if they have the choice." Priscilla felt that warmth again, that sensation of being understood. She turned back to her cooking, and they fell into a comfortable silence. Outside, the sun was sinking toward the coastal mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside, the cabin filled with the smell of cooking food and wood smoke, and for the first time in months, Priscilla did not feel quite so alone. When supper was ready, she dished out generous portions, and they ate without much conversation, the kind of quiet that comes from shared hunger and good food. Tucker ate with the single-minded focus of someone who spent most of his time in the wilderness, where meals were often cold or hastily prepared over a campfire. He did not speak until his plate was clean, then sat back with a satisfied sigh. "That was the best meal I've had in 6 months," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Priscilla replied, feeling pleased despite herself. She poured them both coffee from the pot on the stove, the strong, bitter brew that her father had always preferred. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why do you live up in the mountains? Most trappers I've known work their territories and then come back to civilization. But you sound like you stay up there by choice, not necessity." Tucker wrapped his large hands around the coffee cup, his expression distant. "I suppose I do. Went up into the high country about 8 years ago, after I got out of the army. Fought in some of the Indian campaigns, saw things I would rather forget. The mountains, they are clean, honest. A bear attacks you, it is because you got between it and its cubs, or you surprised it on a kill. There's no politics, no lies, just survival. That sounds lonely, Priscilla said softly. Sometimes it is, Tucker admitted, but lonely is different from alone. I have known plenty of people who were surrounded by others and still lonely. At least in the mountains, I do not have to pretend to be something I am not. Priscilla understood that more than she could say. I feel that way here sometimes. In town, people look at me and see a poor orphan or a foolish girl or someone to be pitied. Out here, I'm just myself. The land does not care if I am a woman or if I am young or if I should be doing something different with my life. It just asks for work and care, and in return, it provides. Tucker studied her across the table, and something shifted in his expression, a kind of recognition. You are not what I expected when I saw those riders circling your cabin. What did you expect? Someone scared, someone needing to be rescued. He shook his head slightly. But you were ready to fight. You would have taken at least one or two of them down before they got to you. I still needed help, Priscilla pointed out. Everyone needs help sometimes. That does not make you weak, just human. Tucker finished his coffee and stood. I should let you get some rest. I will be in the barn if you need anything. You hear trouble in the night, fire a shot, and I will come running. Priscilla rose as well, following him to the door. Night had fallen while they ate, and stars blazed overhead in the clear autumn air. Tucker, she said as he stepped onto the porch, and he turned back. Thank you. Not just for helping with those men, but for understanding. For not treating me like I am broken or foolish for wanting to stay here. His smile was barely visible in the darkness, but she heard it in his voice. You are not foolish. Brave, maybe, or stubborn, but not foolish. Sleep well, Priscilla Brennan. She watched him walk across the yard to the barn, his figure fading into shadow. Then she closed and barred the door, suddenly aware of how much safer she felt knowing he was nearby. It was a strange feeling, this trust in someone she had only just met. But then, the whole day had been strange, from the moment those riders had appeared until now. Priscilla banked the fire and climbed the ladder to her sleeping loft, but sleep was slow in coming. Her mind kept returning to the mountain man in her barn, to the way he had appeared exactly when she needed him, to the understanding in his storm-gray eyes. She told herself not to read too much into it, that he would be gone tomorrow, heading into town and then back to his mountains. But something in her chest ached at that thought, a loneliness she had been ignoring for months, suddenly sharp and present. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into restless sleep filled with dreams of circling riders and steady gray eyes, and the sound of a rifle shot echoing across the hills. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, which made no sense because she was still in her loft and the stove was downstairs. Priscilla sat up quickly, reaching for the rifle she kept beside her bed, then heard Tucker's voice calling from below. Easy, I'm just making breakfast. Did not want to wake you by knocking, but figured the smell would do it eventually. Priscilla relaxed slightly, though her heart was still racing. She climbed down the ladder, acutely aware that her hair was loose and her dress was wrinkled from sleep. Tucker stood at her stove, somehow looking perfectly at ease, despite the fact that he was cooking in someone else's kitchen without invitation. You just walked in? She asked, trying to decide if she should be annoyed or amused. Door was not barred, Tucker said without looking up from the pan. And I heard you moving around up there, so I figured you were awake. Hope you do not mind. I found some eggs in your chicken coop and thought I would make myself useful. Priscilla should probably object on principle, but the bacon smelled incredible, and she had not had someone cook for her in longer than she could remember. I suppose it is a fair trade for supper last night, she said, moving to the basin to splash water on her face. Though most people would consider knocking polite. Most people have not spent 8 years in the wilderness, Tucker replied cheerfully. I have gotten out of practice with polite. Despite herself, Priscilla smiled. There was something disarming about his honesty, the way he simply stated things without pretense or apology. She braided her hair quickly and joined him at the table as he set out plates of bacon, eggs, and leftover cornbread toasted on the stove. They ate in companionable silence, and Priscilla found herself studying him in the morning light, his buckskin shirt stretched across broad shoulders and a heavily muscled chest, the result of years of hard physical work in unforgiving terrain. His hands were scarred and calloused, but his movements were surprisingly careful, even delicate when he poured coffee. He was a study in contradictions, this mountain man, rough and gentle by turns. "I have been thinking," Tucker said as he finished his breakfast, "about what I said yesterday about those men coming back." Priscilla's stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about that. And I do not feel right leaving you here alone, knowing they are out there. So I have got a proposition for you. He set down his cup and met her eyes. "Let me stay on for a while. A few weeks maybe, until winter sets in proper. I can do repairs around the place, hunt for meat, help with whatever needs doing. In exchange, you give me a roof over my head and home-cooked meals. And if those riders come back, they will find 2 people with rifles instead of 1. Priscilla's heart hammered in her chest. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to grab onto this offer of help and safety. But another part, the part that had been fighting for independence all these months, hesitated. "I cannot pay you," she said carefully. "I barely have enough put by to get through winter as it is." "I am not asking for pay," Tucker said. "I am asking for a place to stay and food to eat. Everything else is just being neighborly. People will talk, a man and a woman living on the same property, not married." The words felt foolish even as she said them, but they needed to be acknowledged. Tucker shrugged. "People talk no matter what. Question is whether you care more about their talk or your safety." His expression softened slightly. "I am not trying to pressure you. If you want me to move on, I will. But those men yesterday, they were not the worst I have seen, and even they were too much for one person to handle alone. Winter is coming, and that means drifters and desperate people looking for easy targets. I would rest easier knowing you had backup." It was the last part that decided her, the genuine concern in his voice. This was not a man looking to take advantage or expecting something in return. This was someone offering help because he actually cared what happened to her. "All right," Priscilla said, "a few weeks, until winter, but you take the cabin. I will not have you sleeping in a barn when there's a perfectly good bed downstairs." Tucker looked like he might argue, then nodded. "I will sleep down here by the fire. You keep the loft. That way you still have privacy and can bar yourself in at night if you want." "Deal," Priscilla said, and they shook on it, his large hand engulfing hers. She felt a flutter in her stomach at the contact, something she firmly told herself was just nerves and not attraction. She did not need complications, and getting involved with a man who lived in the mountains and only came to civilization twice a year was about as complicated as it could get. Tucker left after breakfast to ride into Paso Robles and sell his furs, promising to return by evening. Priscilla spent the day working around the homestead, repairing fence posts and mucking out the barn and trying not to think about the fact that she had just agreed to let a man she barely knew move into her cabin. It was practical, she told herself, smart even, but it still felt momentous in a way she could not quite name. He returned just as the sun was setting, riding up the trail with his mule unburdened and saddlebags that clinked with the sound of coins. "Good prices in town," he reported as he dismounted. "Fur market is strong this year, and I picked up some supplies." He unloaded bags of flour, sugar, and coffee, along with ammunition, lamp oil, and a side of cured beef. Priscilla's eyes widened at the quantity. "Tucker, that is too much. I said I could not pay you." "And I said I was not asking for pay," he replied calmly. "This is my contribution to our household. Cannot expect you to feed me without helping with the cost." Priscilla wanted to argue, but the supplies were already on her table and she could not deny they would be useful. "Thank you," she said finally. "This is generous." "Practical," Tucker corrected. "Now, you said something about fence posts needing repair." They fell into an easy rhythm over the following days. Tucker proved to be as good as his word, working from dawn until dusk on the endless tasks required to keep a homestead running. He repaired the fence where elk had pushed through, re-chinked gaps in the cabin walls where winter wind would seep through, and replaced several rotted boards on the barn roof. In the evenings, he hunted, bringing back deer and rabbits that Priscilla preserved or cooked into hearty stews. At night, they sat by the fire and talked, sharing stories of their lives. Priscilla told him about growing up on the homestead, about her mother's death and her brother's departure, and the loneliness that had become her constant companion. Tucker spoke of his time in the Army, carefully editing around the worst parts, and his years in the mountains learning to read weather and animal signs in the subtle language of the wilderness. "Do you ever get scared up there alone?" Priscilla asked one evening as they cleaned the supper dishes together. Tucker considered the question. "Sometimes, mostly of making a stupid mistake, getting injured where no one can help. But the animals do not scare me much anymore. You learn their patterns, and as long as you respect them, they will mostly leave you alone." "What about loneliness? You said it was different from being alone, but it is still loneliness." His hands stilled in the washwater. "I will not lie to you. There are nights when the silence gets heavy, when I wish there was someone to talk to besides my horse, but I always figured that was just part of the life I chose. You cannot have everything." Priscilla heard the resignation in his voice, the quiet acceptance that some things were beyond reach. It echoed her own feelings about her situation, the assumption that because she wanted to stay on her land, she would have to accept being alone. But having Tucker here these past few days had shown her what she had been missing, the pleasure of simple companionship and shared work and someone who understood without needing explanation. It was dangerous, she knew, this growing comfort with his presence. In a few weeks he would leave, head back to his mountains, and she would be alone again. Getting used to having him around would only make his absence harder to bear, but she could not seem to help herself. Every morning she woke eager to start the day because he would be there. Every evening she looked forward to their talks by the fire. And at night, lying in her loft listening to him moving around below, she felt safer than she had felt since her father died. 2 weeks passed in this fashion, the days growing shorter as November approached. The weather turned cold, frost appearing on the grass each morning, and the coastal winds picking up strength. Tucker worked even harder as winter closed in, determined to leave the homestead in good shape before he departed. Priscilla tried not to think about his leaving, but it loomed over her thoughts like a storm cloud. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the way he made coffee in the morning and banked the fire at night, to the sound of his voice and his rare but genuine smiles. More than accustomed, if she was honest with herself. She had developed feelings that went well beyond gratitude or friendship. It was foolish, she knew. Tucker Brennan was not a man for settling down. He had built a life in the wilderness, and everything about him spoke of someone who valued solitude and freedom. Even if he felt some attraction to her, which she was not certain about, he would not give up his mountains for a homestead and a woman he barely knew. So Priscilla kept her feelings locked away and tried to simply enjoy the time they had. She taught him how to make proper biscuits, which he attacked with the dedication he brought to every task. He showed her how to track deer, how to read the signs that spoke of where animals traveled and bedded down. They worked together, harvesting the last of her garden and putting the homestead to bed for winter, and if their hands touched more often than necessary, or their eyes met and held for longer moments, neither of them mentioned it. It was on a cold afternoon in mid-November when everything changed. Tucker had gone into the hills to check on deer signs, leaving Priscilla to work on mending harnesses in the barn. She was focused on her work when she heard horses approaching, and her blood went cold. She grabbed the rifle that was never far from reach and moved to the barn door. 5 riders were coming up the trail, and even at a distance she recognized them. The same men from before, the ones Tucker had driven off. They were back. Priscilla's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to move, to think. She could not defend both the cabin and the barn, so she ran for the cabin, praying they had not seen her yet. She made it inside and barred the door, then positioned herself at the window with her rifle ready. Her hands shook slightly as she checked that the weapon was loaded. The riders spread out as they approached, clearly having learned from their last encounter. They stayed far enough apart that she could not cover all of them with one rifle, close enough to support each other if shooting started. The leader, the scarred man with tobacco-stained teeth, called out from a safe distance. "Where is your mountain man friend, miss? He coming to save you again?" Priscilla did not answer, just kept her rifle trained on him. Her heart hammered so hard she thought they might hear it. "We checked in town," the man continued. "Asked around about you. Know what we learned? You're all alone out here. That big fellow who ran us off, he was just passing through. Probably long gone by now. So it is just you and us, and we got all day." Still, Priscilla said nothing. She scanned the tree line, hoping desperately to see Tucker emerging from the forest. But there was no sign of him, and she had no idea how long he would be gone. "Tell you what," the leader said, his voice taking on a false friendliness that made her skin crawl. "You come out peaceful. Let us take what we came for, and maybe nobody gets hurt. You try to fight, and this will go hard for you. Your choice." Priscilla found her voice. "I will shoot the first man who comes within 50 yards of this cabin. That is my choice." The men laughed, but it sounded forced. They remembered she could shoot, remembered one of them losing his hat to a rifle. But there were 5 of them, and they knew she could not get all of them before they reached her. "Stubborn," the leader said. "I almost admire that, but it is not going to change how this ends." He gestured to his men. "Spread out. We will come at her from all sides." Priscilla's breath came fast and shallow as the riders began to move, circling her cabin like wolves closing in on wounded prey. She had maybe 1 shot before they rushed her, 2 if she was fast. After that it would be down to her pistol, and she was not nearly as accurate with that. She might take 1 or 2 of them, but they would get her in the end. She was trying to decide who to shoot first when she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap with hope and relief. A rifle shot, the crack echoing across the hills, and one of the riders went down clutching his leg. The others wheeled their horses in confusion, trying to locate the shooter. Tucker emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing from where Priscilla had expected him, moving at a run with his rifle in hand. He must have heard the voices and circled around to come at them from behind. He fired again, and another rider's horse screamed and bolted, throwing its owner to the ground. "3 of you left," Tucker called out, his voice carrying clear and cold across the yard. "You want to join your friends on the ground, or you want to ride out of here while you still can?" The leader's face twisted with rage. "You again! Who the hell are you?" "Someone who does not take kindly to men threatening women," Tucker replied. He had reached Priscilla's porch now, positioning himself beside her door. She fumbled with the bar and opened it, and he stepped inside without taking his eyes off the riders. "Last chance to leave." "There are 3 of us and 2 of you," the leader snarled. "We can still take you." Priscilla raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel at the leader's chest. Her hands were steady now, steadied by Tucker's presence beside her. "Try it," she said quietly. "See what happens." For a long moment the riders stared at them, weighing odds and options. Priscilla could see the calculation in their eyes, the same cold assessment as before. But this time the equation was different. This time there were 2 rifles pointed at them, 2 people ready and willing to defend this ground, and they had already lost 2 of their number before the fight even started. The leader spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "This is not over." "Yeah, it is," Tucker said flatly. "You come back here again, I will not aim for your leg. I will aim for your heart, and I do not miss. Now get your wounded and get out." The riders collected their injured companions and retreated, moving faster than they had arrived. Priscilla and Tucker watched them until they disappeared down the trail, not lowering their rifles until the sound of hooves had faded completely. Only then did Priscilla feel her legs start to shake. She set her rifle carefully aside and sank into a chair, reaction setting in. Tucker barred the door and checked the windows, making sure there were no other threats, then crouched in front of her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now. "No, scared but not hurt." Priscilla looked at him, at his concerned face and storm-gray eyes, and something broke loose in her chest. "Thank you, again. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come back when you did." "You would have fought," Tucker said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "But I am glad I was here so you did not have to." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "They were right about one thing, though. They will come back. As long as you are here alone, you will be a target." "So what do I do?" Priscilla asked, hating the helplessness in her voice. "Abandon my home? Let them win?" Tucker was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing an absent pattern on her cheek. The touch sent shivers through her despite the gravity of their situation. "There might be another option," he said finally, "but you would have to be willing to take a chance on a mountain man who is not good with people and prefers bears to civilization." Priscilla's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I mean marry me," Tucker said bluntly. "I know I am not much of a catch. I live rough, I'm gone for months at a time, and I have got no property except what I can carry on a mule. But I am a good hunter, I can provide, and I will protect you with my life. And if you are my wife, those men will not dare come back. They were willing to threaten a woman alone. They would not be so willing to face a husband who would hunt them down if they hurt his family." Priscilla stared at him, her mind reeling. She had spent weeks trying to convince herself not to develop feelings for this man, and now he was proposing marriage as casually as he might suggest building another fence. "Tucker, we barely know each other." "I know you are brave and stubborn and kind," Tucker said. "I know you would fight a losing battle rather than surrender what is yours. I know you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted, and you can track a deer almost as well as I can. I know I sleep better on your cabin floor than I have slept in 8 years in the mountains, and I know the thought of leaving you here alone makes me feel sick." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "If you need to know more than that before you can trust me, I understand. But I am not offering this just for practicality. I'm offering because I want to stay. I want this to be my home with you." Priscilla felt tears prick her eyes. Everything he said echoed her own feelings, the things she had been too afraid to acknowledge. She had been falling in love with him slowly over these weeks, one shared meal and quiet conversation at a time. The question was whether she was brave enough to take this leap, to trust him with her heart as well as her safety. "What about your mountains?" she asked. "You said they were your life." "They were," Tucker agreed. "But people change. What they need changes. 8 years ago I needed silence and solitude. Now I need something different, someone different." His hand moved to cup her face fully, his touch gentle despite his calloused palms. "I'm not saying it will be easy. I will probably drive you crazy being underfoot all the time when I'm used to being alone. And I will still need to trap, at least until we can build up enough of a stake to run the homestead full time. But I want to try, if you will have me." Priscilla covered his hand with hers, leaning into his touch. Her heart felt too big for her chest, full of hope and fear and something that might be joy. "I want to try too," she whispered. "I have wanted you to stay since the first week, but I thought you would never give up your mountains for a homestead and a woman you barely knew." "Shows what you know," Tucker said, and his smile transformed his face, made him look younger and lighter than she had ever seen him. "I would give up a lot more than mountains for you, Priscilla Brennan." Then he was kissing her, and Priscilla stopped thinking about danger or practicality or anything beyond the feel of his lips on hers and his strong arms pulling her close. She had been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts by boys in town who saw her as a prize to be won. This was nothing like that. Tucker kissed her like she was precious, like she mattered, his touch reverent despite the strength she could feel coiled in his massive frame. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "So, is that a yes?" Priscilla laughed, the sound startling her with its joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, you crazy mountain man." "Not crazy," Tucker protested. "Practical. A husband protects his family. Those riders will not bother us again once word spreads that you are no longer alone." "I have not been alone since the day you appeared," Priscilla said softly. "I just did not realize it yet." They rode into Paso Robles the next morning, Tucker on his bay and Priscilla on her father's old mare. The town was small, barely more than a main street with false front buildings clustered around a central plaza. But it had a church and a priest, and that was all they needed. Father Benedict married them that afternoon with 2 shopkeepers as witnesses, a simple ceremony that took less than 10 minutes. Priscilla wore her best dress, and Tucker had brushed the trail dust from his buckskins, and when the priest pronounced them husband and wife, she felt something settle into place in her chest. This was right. This was what she wanted. Even if it had happened so fast it made her head spin. They spent their wedding night in a boarding house in town, the first time Priscilla had slept anywhere but her cabin in months. Tucker was gentle with her, patient with her nervousness, and when she finally lay in his arms afterwards, she felt safe in a way she had not since her father died. Maybe safe in a way she had never felt before, because this was not the safety of childhood, but the safety of partnership, of knowing someone had chosen to stand beside her. "No regrets?" Tucker murmured into her hair as she drifted toward sleep. "None," Priscilla replied. "You?" "Not a one." They returned to the homestead the next day as husband and wife, and Tucker immediately set about making it clear that this was now their home, not just Priscilla's. He moved his belongings into the cabin properly, hanging his rifle on the wall and stacking his traps in the corner. He spent hours working on improvements, building proper shutters for the windows and reinforcing the barn doors. Everything he did spoke of permanence, of a man putting down roots. Word spread fast in the valley that Priscilla Brennan had married, and the riders did not return. Whether they heard about Tucker's reputation or simply decided a married woman was too much trouble, Priscilla did not know and did not care. What mattered was that the threat had passed and she could finally breathe easy. Winter closed in properly in December, bringing cold rains that turned the trails to mud and kept them close to the cabin. Tucker proved to be good company when trapped indoors, handy with tools and willing to help with the endless indoor tasks that winter required. They worked together, preserving food, mending tools, and planning for spring planting. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked or simply existed in comfortable silence, and Priscilla found herself falling more in love with her mountain man husband every day. He was not perfect. He had moments of darkness, times when the memories of his war years rose up and he grew quiet and distant. His table manners were rough after years in the wilderness, and he sometimes forgot that doors needed to be knocked on before entering. But he was honest and kind and fiercely protective, and he made Priscilla laugh more than she had laughed in years. And at night, in the darkness of their bed, he showed her passion she had never imagined, treating her body like something precious even as his own desire burned hot. Priscilla had heard other women whisper about the duty of marriage, how wives had to endure their husbands' attentions. She thought they must be doing something wrong because there was nothing of endurance in the way Tucker touched her, only pleasure and connection and a growing intimacy that transcended the physical. Spring came early in 1879. The rains giving way to sunny days that warmed the earth and called green things forth. Tucker worked the fields alongside Priscilla, his strength making light work of the heavy plowing. They planted wheat and barley and corn, along with an expanded vegetable garden, planning for a future that seemed bright with possibility. In May, Priscilla realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Tucker over breakfast one morning that she thought she was pregnant. He had been drinking coffee when she spoke, and he froze with the cup halfway to his mouth, his eyes going wide. "Pregnant?" he repeated as though he did not quite believe his ears. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but the signs are all there." Priscilla watched him anxiously, suddenly worried about his reaction. They had not discussed children, had not planned for this, even though it was a natural consequence of their marriage. "Are you upset?" Tucker set down his cup with exaggerated care, then crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and swept her into his arms. "Upset?" "Priscilla, I'm terrified and thrilled and about a dozen other things I do not have words for. A baby. Our baby." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Priscilla said, and realized she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, I am happy. Scared too, but happy." Tucker kissed her thoroughly, then set her gently back on her feet as though she might break. "You need to rest. No more heavy work. I will handle the fields and the animals. You just focus on staying healthy." "Tucker, I am pregnant, not fragile. I can still work." "But you do not have to," he insisted. "Please, Priscilla, let me do this. Let me take care of you and our child." She could see the plea in his eyes, the need to protect and provide. It was part of who he was, this fierce dedication to caring for what was his. So she nodded, and he relaxed slightly, though he continued to hover over her for the rest of the day like she might vanish if he looked away. They rode into Paso Robles the next week, so Priscilla could see the doctor, a kind older man who confirmed what she already knew. She was pregnant, about 3 months along, due in late December or early January. The doctor pronounced her healthy and gave her instructions for caring for herself, which Tucker memorized with the same focus he brought to tracking deer. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer. Priscilla's belly swelled as the crops grew, and Tucker became even more protective, if such a thing were possible. He refused to let her lift anything heavy or work in the hot sun, taking over most of the physical labor himself. Priscilla protested, but secretly found his concern endearing, this big, rough mountain man treating her like precious glass. In the evenings, Tucker would sit with his hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. His expression during these moments was soft with wonder, and Priscilla would watch him and marvel at how far they had both come from that day he had appeared at her cabin. Less than a year ago, they had been strangers. Now they were building a life together, creating a family. Fall came again, the second since they had met, and Tucker worked frantically to get everything ready before winter and the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from oak, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. He hunted every day, bringing back deer and elk to fill their larder. He repaired anything that looked even slightly worn, determined that his wife and child would want for nothing. "You do not have to do all this," Priscilla told him one evening as he worked on repairing the barn roof by lamplight. "We will be fine." "I know," Tucker said, not pausing in his work, "but I want to. I want to give you and this baby the best life I can. You took a chance on me, Priscilla. Let me prove that you made the right choice." "You already have," she said softly. "Every day you are here, you prove it." Winter arrived in force in early December, bringing cold winds and frost that turned the world white and silent. Priscilla had slowed down considerably as her pregnancy advanced, her belly so large now that simple tasks became challenging. Tucker did everything for her, cooking and cleaning and managing the homestead while she rested. She tried to help, but he was adamant, wanting her to save her strength for the birth. The baby came on a cold night in early January 1880, 2 weeks past the new year. Tucker rode through darkness and icy wind to fetch the doctor and the midwife, his heart in his throat with worry. By the time they returned, Priscilla's pains were coming hard and fast, and she gripped Tucker's hand with desperate strength as the midwife examined her. "Not long now," the woman said with the calm of long experience. "This baby is in a hurry." She was right. Their son was born just before dawn, arriving with a lusty cry that made Tucker's eyes fill with tears. The baby was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. The midwife cleaned him and wrapped him in soft blankets, then placed him in Priscilla's arms. "You have a strong, healthy boy," she announced. "Congratulations." Tucker stared at his wife and son, overwhelmed by emotions he could not name. This tiny person, this perfect little human, was his and Priscilla's. They had created him together, and Tucker felt the weight of that responsibility and privilege settle over him like a mantle. "What should we name him?" Priscilla asked, looking up at Tucker with exhausted joy. Tucker thought for a moment, then said, "Thomas, for your father. Thomas James Brennan." Priscilla's eyes filled with tears. "That's perfect. Papa would have loved that." They named the baby Thomas, and Tucker held him while Priscilla slept, this tiny warm weight in his massive arms. He thought about all the paths that had led him to this moment, the choices and chances that had brought him down from the mountains on that particular day to find this particular woman defending her home with a rifle. It felt like fate, like something that was always meant to be. "I will keep you safe," he whispered to his sleeping son. "You and your mother both. That is my promise to you." True to his word, Tucker proved to be a devoted father. He carved toys for Thomas and sang to him in a surprisingly decent voice, old songs from his childhood that Priscilla had never heard. He was patient with the baby's crying and gentle with his small, fragile body, this big mountain man cradling his son like the treasure he was. Priscilla recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning as winter slowly gave way to spring. She and Tucker fell into new rhythms, their lives revolving around Thomas's needs and the demands of the homestead. It was exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also deeply satisfying, this life they were building together. Thomas grew quickly, a healthy baby with his father's strong frame and his mother's quick mind. By his first summer, he was crawling everywhere, exploring his world with fearless curiosity. Tucker baby proofed the cabin as best he could, and then simply followed Thomas around, ready to catch him before he could get into too much trouble. "He is going to be a handful," Priscilla predicted, watching her son try to climb onto the furniture. "He is perfect," Tucker replied, scooping Thomas up and tossing him gently into the air, making the baby shriek with laughter. Just like his mother. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas took his first steps at 10 months old, his first words at a year. He grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's quick temper. Tucker taught him to recognize animal tracks and bird calls, while Priscilla worked on his letters and numbers, determined that her son would be educated. In the spring of 1882, Priscilla became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was harder on her body, her mind was more at ease. Their second child, a daughter they named Patricia Rose, was born in November, a tiny, delicate thing who looked nothing like her brother. Where Thomas was sturdy and dark, Patricia was fair and small, with blonde curls and hazel eyes. Tucker was besotted immediately, this rough mountain man reduced to mush by his tiny daughter. He held her for hours, just staring at her in wonder, and Priscilla would watch them and feel her heart expand with love. They had come so far from those early frightened days, built something strong and real from the shaky foundation of a crisis and a practical proposal. The homestead thrived under their joint care. Tucker's trapping skills and Priscilla's careful management meant they always had enough money for necessities and a little extra besides. They expanded their fields and their herds, adding cattle to their sheep and chickens. The cabin that had once housed just Priscilla now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Thomas grew into a boy who loved the outdoors, following his father everywhere and learning the skills that Tucker had mastered. Patricia became her mother's shadow, helping with cooking and gardening and caring for the animals. Together, they were a unit, a family that worked and played and loved fiercely. Neighbors began to settle closer as California grew, but the Brennans remained somewhat isolated by choice. Tucker never quite lost his preference for solitude, and Priscilla understood that. They made trips to town when necessary, attended church occasionally, but they kept to themselves for the most part, content with their own company and the life they had built. In the summer of 1885, Tucker took Thomas on his first real hunting trip into the mountains, a week-long expedition that marked the boys' transition toward manhood. Priscilla watched them ride away, her 7-year-old son sitting tall in his saddle beside his father, and felt both pride and trepidation. Thomas was growing up, becoming his own person, and while that was natural and right, it still made her heart ache a little. They returned a week later with stories of deer and bear and sleeping under the stars, and Thomas could not stop talking about everything he had seen. Tucker met Priscilla's eyes over their son's head and smiled, and she knew he had given the boy more than hunting lessons. He'd given him confidence in skills and the knowledge that he could survive whatever the world threw at him. Patricia grew too, from a delicate baby into a spirited girl who was tougher than she looked. She could ride before she was 5 and shoot a rifle by 7, though Priscilla hoped she would never need those skills the way Priscilla herself had. The world was changing, becoming more civilized even here in California's interior. The wild frontier was slowly being tamed, but some things remained constant. Tucker's devotion to his family never wavered. Every morning he woke grateful for the life he had been given, for the woman who had taken a chance on a rough mountain man and the children they had created together. And every night he thanked whatever force had brought him down from the mountains on that particular October day in 1878, had sent him to check on the James Brennan homestead, where he found a woman defending her home with a rifle. The years turned into a decade, then more. Thomas grew into a young man, strong like his father, with his mother's determination. Patricia became a young woman, beautiful and fierce, and completely her own person. More children came, 2 more boys and another girl, until the Brennan cabin was bursting with life and noise. Tucker aged gracefully, his dark hair turning silver, but his strength barely diminished. He still worked the homestead with the same dedication he had brought to everything since that first day. Still hunted in the mountains, though not as far or as long. His children called him Papa and hung on his every word, and Priscilla would watch him with them and fall in love with him all over again. She aged too, her blonde hair going gray and lines appearing around her eyes. But Tucker looked at her the same way he had when they were young, like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He told her he loved her every day, showed her with his actions even more than his words. After more than 30 years of marriage, they were still partners, still best friends, still deeply in love. In the summer of 1910, Tucker and Priscilla stood on their porch and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had married and built a house on the north corner of the property. Patricia had married a good man from town and lived in Paso Robles, but visited often with her children. The homestead that had once seemed so isolated now felt like the center of a small empire. 3 generations of Brennans living and working together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Priscilla asked, leaning against Tucker's solid warmth. "That day those riders came, did you think we would end up here?" Tucker wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I did not let myself imagine anything beyond keeping you safe, but I am glad it worked out this way." "Just glad?" Priscilla teased, looking up at him. His eyes softened, the storm-gray depths warm with emotion. "Grateful, humbled, more blessed than any man has a right to be." He kissed her forehead. "You saved me that day as much as I saved you, gave me a reason to come down from my mountains and live again." "We saved each other," Priscilla corrected. "That is what partners do." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the coastal mountains and turn the sky gold and orange and red. Their grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, mixing with the calls of birds settling in for the night. Somewhere in the barn, one of Thomas's sons was milking the cows. Smoke rose from Patricia's house in the distance, her husband making supper. This was what they had built together, Tucker and Priscilla. Not just a homestead, but a legacy. Not just a family, but a dynasty. It had started with a rifle and a threat, and a mountain man who chose to stand beside a woman he did not know. It had grown through trust and work and love into something neither of them could have imagined. "No regrets?" Tucker asked, echoing his words from their wedding night more than 3 decades earlier. Priscilla smiled, the same answer on her lips. "Not a one." They stayed on the porch until full dark, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. Behind them, the cabin glowed with lamplight and the sounds of family. Before them, the land stretched out wild and beautiful, the California hills they had claimed and tamed and loved. This was home. This was family. This was everything they had fought for and everything they had won. And as the stars came out overhead, brilliant and cold and eternal, Tucker pulled Priscilla closer and knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, exactly where he had always been meant to be. From the moment he heard that rifle shot and saw a woman defending her home with courage and determination. He had stood beside her until the danger left, and then he had stayed beside her for the rest of their lives, through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and challenge. That was what love meant. That was what partnership meant. And as they finally went inside to the warmth and light of their home, Tucker Brennan knew he would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought him here. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons turning. By 1915, Tucker was in his 60s, but still vital, still working his land with the dedication that had defined his life. Priscilla matched him step for step, her spirit as strong as ever, even if her body sometimes protested the work. They had slowed down some, letting their children and grandchildren take on more of the heavy labor, but they remained the heart of the family. Thomas ran most of the day-to-day operations now, a capable man in his 30s with children of his own. He had inherited his father's skill with animals and his mother's head for business, and under his management the homestead continued to prosper. Patricia's husband had established a successful store in Paso Robles, and their children divided their time between town and the homestead, getting the best of both worlds. The younger Brennan children had scattered somewhat, pursuing their own dreams while remaining connected to the land that had shaped them. One son had gone to San Francisco to study law, another worked as a horse trader, traveling up and down California buying and selling stock. The youngest daughter had married a teacher and moved to Sacramento, though she returned every summer with her children to spend a few weeks on the homestead. Through it all, Tucker and Priscilla remained the anchor, the foundation on which everything else was built. They were the elders now, the ones the grandchildren came to for stories and advice. Tucker would tell them about his years in the mountains, about learning to survive in the wilderness and the beauty of complete solitude. Priscilla would share stories of their early days on the homestead, of building something from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. The grandchildren loved the story of how their grandparents met, how Tucker had appeared just when Priscilla needed him most and stood beside her against danger. They would beg to hear it over and over, never tiring of the tale of courage, and romance and unlikely love. Tucker and Priscilla would exchange glances over the children's heads, remembering that day with crystal clarity despite all the years that had passed. "Tell us about the riders, Grandpa," the youngest would demand. "Tell us how you shot the hat right off that man's head." Tucker would chuckle and embellish the story slightly, making it exciting for young ears while leaving out the parts that had been truly frightening. He would tell them about finding Priscilla defending her cabin, about being impressed by her courage, about deciding to stay and help. But he always emphasized the most important part, that their grandmother had not needed rescuing. She had needed a partner, someone to stand beside her, and that was what he had tried to be from that day forward. "Your grandmother is the bravest person I have ever known," he would tell them seriously. "She faced down 5 armed men without flinching. She kept this homestead running after her father died, when most women would have given up. She raised you children's parents to be strong and capable. Everything we have, everything we are, starts with her courage." Priscilla would blush and protest that he was exaggerating, but her eyes would shine with pleasure at his words. After all these years, Tucker still had the power to make her feel cherished and valued. That was the real magic of their marriage, she thought, not the passion, though that had never completely faded, but the deep abiding respect and affection they held for each other. In 1918, the world was transformed by the Great War raging in Europe. California felt far removed from the fighting, but the effects rippled out to touch even the Brennan homestead. Their grandson, Thomas's eldest son, enlisted and shipped overseas. The family spent anxious months waiting for letters, praying for his safe return. When he finally came home in 1919, he was changed, quieter and harder, but alive. Tucker recognized something of himself in his grandson's eyes, the shadow that came from seeing combat. He took the young man hunting in the mountains, just the two of them, and they spent a week in the wilderness not talking about the war, but not needing to. Sometimes the best healing came from silence and space, from remembering that the world held beauty as well as horror. They returned with the grandson looking lighter. Some of the tension eased from his shoulders. He thanked Tucker gruffly, unable to articulate what the trip had meant, but Tucker understood. He had been given the same gift years ago when these mountains had helped him heal from his own war experiences. Passing it forward to the next generation felt right, felt like closing a circle. The 1920s brought prosperity to the Brennan family. The homestead was well established now, profitable and sustainable. Thomas had diversified their income, raising not just crops but cattle and horses for the growing California market. They had money in the bank, something that would have seemed impossible to Priscilla in those early, desperate days after her father's death. Tucker and Priscilla celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party lasted all day, with music and food and stories that made everyone laugh and cry. At sunset, Tucker pulled Priscilla aside and they walked together through the property, just the two of them. 40 years, Priscilla marveled, looking at the man beside her. His hair was white now, his face lined with age, but he was still her Tucker, still the mountain man who had stood beside her when she needed him most. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I know what you mean," Tucker agreed. He moved more slowly now, his joints stiff with age, but his hand was steady as it took hers. "I cannot remember what my life was like before you. Cannot imagine what it would have been like if I had not come down from the mountains that day." "Lonely," Priscilla said softly. "For both of us." They stopped at the spot where Tucker had first appeared from the trees, where he had confronted those riders and changed both their lives forever. The trees had grown taller in 40 years, the clearing slightly smaller as the forest reclaimed its edges, but the cabin still stood solid, smoke rising from its chimney, light glowing from its windows. Inside, their family celebrated, 3 generations of Brennans who existed because 2 people had chosen to trust each other. "I would do it all again," Tucker said, pulling Priscilla close. "Every moment, every choice, every hard year, and every good one. I would do it all again to end up here with you." Priscilla leaned into his embrace, letting his strength support her as it had for 4 decades. "So would I," she whispered. "I love you, Tucker Brennan, my mountain man, my partner, my home." "I love you too," Tucker replied, and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion of their youth. The years had not diminished what they felt for each other, only deepened it, turned it into something rich and complex and absolutely unbreakable. They walked back to the party hand in hand, to the noise and laughter and love that filled their home. This was what they had built together, what they had defended and nurtured and watched grow. This was their legacy, not just the land or the buildings, but the family they had created, the love they had fostered, the example they had set of what partnership and commitment truly meant. The years continued to turn. Tucker and Priscilla grew older, moving into their 70s and then beyond. They slowed down more, spending their days on the porch or in the garden rather than working the fields. But they remained sharp in mind and strong in spirit, the backbone of their family, even as they passed more responsibility to the next generation. In 1928, on a warm spring morning, Tucker woke to find Priscilla already up and dressed, sitting on the porch with coffee and watching the sunrise. He joined her, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. They had done this thousands of times over the years, watched the sun rise on another day together. "Beautiful morning," Tucker observed, sipping his coffee. "They all are," Priscilla replied. "Every morning I wake up next to you is beautiful." Tucker reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gray to pink to gold. Birds sang in the trees. In the distance, they could hear Thomas and his sons starting the day's work. The homestead was waking up, beginning another day of the endless cycle of seasons and tasks. "Do you ever think about that day?" Priscilla asked suddenly. "The day we met?" "All the time," Tucker admitted. "Best day of my life, though I did not know it then." "Mine too." Priscilla squeezed his hand. "I was so scared that day. Scared of those men, scared of being alone, scared I would lose everything. And then you appeared like something out of a dream, and everything changed." "We changed everything," Tucker corrected. "Together." They fell silent again, but it was the silence of two people who did not need words to communicate. After 50 years together, they could read each other's thoughts in a glance, understand each other's moods from a gesture. They were two people who had become one unit, one partnership, one love. The morning stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. They would spend it together as they had spent every day for the past half-century. They would work in the garden and visit with their grandchildren and share meals with their family. They would move through the familiar rhythms of their life, the life they had built from courage and trust and love. And when evening came, they would sit on this porch again and watch the sunset, grateful for another day together. Because that was what love looked like after 50 years. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but simply choosing each other every single day, standing beside each other through whatever came, building something lasting and strong and beautiful. Tucker had been a mountain man who preferred solitude to civilization. Priscilla had been a woman alone defending her home with a rifle. Together they had become something greater than either of them could have been apart. They had become partners, lovers, parents, grandparents, the foundation of a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As the sun climbed higher and the day began in earnest, Tucker and Priscilla rose from their chairs and went inside to breakfast. Their family was already gathering, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the expanded cabin with noise and life. Tucker looked at Priscilla across the crowded table, saw her smile at something one of the babies was doing, and felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. This was everything he had never known he wanted. This was the life he had been searching for in those lonely years in the mountains, the connection he had craved without being able to name it. And it had all started with a moment of courage, a decision to stand beside someone who needed help, a choice to stay when he could have moved on. The best choice he had ever made, the only choice that had ever really mattered. Because everything good in his life had flowed from that single decision to step out of the trees and defend a woman he had never met, a woman who would become his wife, his partner, his home. Tucker Brennan had found Priscilla defending her cabin with a rifle. He had stood beside her until the danger left. And then he had stayed beside her for the rest of his life, through 50 years of joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, building something beautiful and lasting and true. That was love. That was partnership. That was what forever looked like. And as he sat at the table surrounded by the family they had created, Tucker knew with absolute certainty that he had found his place in the world, not in the mountains he had loved, but here, in this cabin with this woman and these people. He had found home, and it had been worth every moment of the journey that brought him here. The story of Tucker and Priscilla Brennan would be told and retold through generations, becoming family legend. The mountain man who appeared when he was needed most, the brave woman who defended her home, the love that grew from crisis into something unbreakable. It was a story of courage and trust and the choice to stand beside someone when it mattered most. And it was a story with a happy ending, because the best stories always are. Not happy because nothing hard ever happened, but happy because two people faced whatever came together, supported each other through every challenge, and built something beautiful that lasted not just for their lifetime, but for generations beyond. That was the real happy ending. Not perfection, but partnership. Not ease, but commitment. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone who would stand beside you through whatever came and never waver in their devotion. Tucker and Priscilla had that. They had found it in each other on an October day in 1878, when a mountain man heard trouble and chose to help, when a woman defending her cabin found an unexpected ally. They had nurtured it through 50 years of marriage, through raising children and building a homestead and creating a life neither of them had imagined possible. And as they sat together on their porch that spring morning in 1928, hands clasped and hearts full, they knew with certainty that they had succeeded. They had built something lasting. They had loved well and been loved in return. They had found their happy ending, and it was better than anything they could have dreamed. The sun climbed higher. The day unfolded. And Tucker and Priscilla moved through it together, as they always had and always would. Two people who had become one, standing beside each other until the very end. That was their story. That was their legacy. That was their love, strong and true and forever.